So the first thing that I will do when someone comes to see me, whether it's strictly for an assessment or it's their first personal training session, I'll have them perform a squat, and I'll just tell them, perform a squat, and then we'll see what happens. Typically, one of the first things that you may see people do is when they do squat, they'll lean forward with their knees. So they're coming forward and then their heels come off the floor. And they perform the squat like this, and it's putting a lot of stress under their knees, and it's just not a good movement pattern. So the simple correction to this to get people to perform a proper squat would be to sit their hips back. And one way I may coach this with somebody is I'll have them sit back to a chair. So I can grab a chair, or you can use a box. And from here, I will literally just have them sit in the chair, keeping their chest tall, keeping their feet about hip width. And then from here, just having them stand up and then squatting back to the chair. So teaching them to get their hips back instead of getting their knees forward. So just correcting that simple movement error, and you can simply just use a chair to cue somebody to sit their hips back. Typically, you'll see people clean up their squat right away, and then they will get the movement pattern down. So that'd be a simple correction if someone was squatting with their knees forward and they're putting a lot of stress under the knees, is really you're just trying to get them to sit their hips back. And maybe a simple verbal cue, such as sit back like you're sitting into a chair, and they may not need a chair, may correct that. Now moving on to the second mistake that I often see people make is that their knees cave in. So what you'll see happen with people is when they squat down, their knees cave in. So there's this caving in of the knees, which puts the knees in a very vulnerable position, and there's a high risk of an injury occurring if you continue to squat like this over time, especially as you add load. Typically, the reason this occurs is people need to just be cued to push their knees out a little bit and engage their glutes through their hips here. And one way we can cue this is we can take a mini band, when we can place it around someone's knees, and we can have them push their knees out like a clamshell, maintain that tension, and then have them squat down, maybe just a quarter of the way, then up, just to get them used to squatting with a little bit of tension through the hips here. And then what you'll notice is now that the band's providing resistance, it's forcing the knees to push out, because now we gotta push against the knees collapsing in. So we really engaging the glutes here and pop it up. So simply just using a mini band just above the knees may help correct that error in somebody that their knees are caving in. And over time, we may have to build up the glutes. So we may do some side steps, mini band, clamshells, sideline hip abductions to address a gluteal weakness. And that'll have some good carryover to the squat. Now, moving to our third mistake here that I'll see happen is not necessarily a mistake, but it's more of just a mobility restriction at the ankles. So what you'll see with some people, they are so tight through their ankles that they get very limited dorsiflexion and they can't squat deep at all. And the reason being is just there could be a lot of stiffness that exists at the ankles. There could be a previous injury that has occurred. So we may want to encourage a little bit more dorsiflexion. And we can do that by elevating the feet. So if we get two just weight plates here, and then we have someone stand on them just with the heels. So the front of the foot's on the ground here, and then we have them squat down. You may notice a significant improvement in their squat pattern. And the reason being is just because by elevating the heels, we're encouraging a little bit more mobility through the ankles here. And they're not as restricted as they go down if they just squatted with their feet flat. So while it's a little bit of a crutch that's correcting the problem, it's a temporary solution to help someone get through the squat motion safely until we maybe address that mobility restriction, which may be accompanied by ankle mobility drills. We may want to do some foam rolling around the calf around the foot to address any stiffness that may be present and perhaps improve some mobility there. Now, moving to our fourth mistake is the toes coming up on the squat. This is a common mistake you'll see people make if their balance is a little bit off. So what you'll see people do is their squat will look pretty good. They'll be up and down, but you'll see their toes curling up as they squat down. And all that the toes are doing is when they curl up, is it's just trying to reposition them as their balance is off a little bit and they're not stable as they should be. So when I see people curling up with their toes when they squat like this, what I'll have them do is I'll just tell them, keep your toes down. I'll use a verbal cue, toes down, and then grip the floor and spread the feet. So it's like you're gripping the floor, grabbing it, kind of if you were to spread your hands on the floor. Think of the same thing with your feet. You may feel a little bit of activation through the hips here. From there, keep that position, stay stable, and then squat down. And just maybe take a few extra seconds, set yourself and position yourself before jumping into the squat. Now, moving to squat, tip number 5 is, what is the low back position? So what you'll see people do is their squat may be perfectly fine, but when they squat down, there may be a rounding of the back here. You may see a little bit of butt wink occurring. And this can be concerning for someone that has flexion-based back pain because they could trigger their symptoms just by going into that position. Or if someone's looking to prevent, say, disc herniation from developing, it's important that we correct that butt wink and we prevent that from occurring, because as they load up, that could create a disc herniation. So not everyone is made to squat all the way to the ground. So what I'll have people do is I'll just have them squat as deep as they can. And then once we see when the low back is rounding, I'll tell them to stop there. And then we'll play around with positioning. Maybe we'll go a little bit closer with the feet. Does their back round sooner? Or if we go with a wider stance, toes out a bit, feet a little bit wide, are they able to get deeper without the back rounding? If that's the case, the wider stance is more favorable and they can get deeper, that's going to be their optimal squat stance just for their anatomy. Whereas if their feet are closer together and the back starts to round sooner, it's not going to be an optimal squat stance. Everyone's genetics and anatomy is a little bit different, and so we want to put them in the best position possible to squat efficiently and safely. And if it's someone that's a little bit more, or maybe has an existing back issue, instead of them actually squatting, I may just have them on a table with their hands under their shoulders, and we'll just do a rock back. We'll go with feet, knees together, and then we'll see where the back maybe rounds, and then we can go a little bit wider, and then even a little bit of a wider, more of a sumo stance, and we can just assess the back in an unloaded position, just to prevent any flare-ups or pain from occurring if someone does have existing back issues. Now, moving on to tip number 6, we're going to talk about foot positioning and foot stance. What is optimal? Optimal is going to be different for everybody, but it's important that we just look at the individual. What's their anatomy? What's their previous injury history? Any restrictions that they have, and then put them in the best position possible to squat safely and efficiently. So when people set up, you may see people with 1 foot forward, 1 foot back just a little bit, and they'll squat down, or the opposite way. Typically, those are just little minor things that we may correct just to make sure their feet are aligned. And then we may encourage a little bit of out-toeing or a little bit of external rotation at the hips, and then squat down, or maybe a little bit closer. Everyone's stance is going to be a little bit differently. Typically, I'll have them try to be as symmetrical as possible, and then we'll play around from there, depending on how their squat looks and feels. We may have to adjust 1 foot, and we may keep the other one out, 1 foot forward, 1 foot out. A little bit different for everybody on that, but I would just say for the average kind of person, typically just for starting, have a stance of about hip width and a little bit of the hips just pointed a little bit out is what I would recommend for most. Now, it's going to be specific to everybody though, but just aim for more of a symmetrical stance, I would say, to start. And then once you get a little bit more advanced, then I would encourage you to see a personal trainer that can give you a little bit more feedback and specifics to more of an optimal stance that is going to be more fine-tuned to you. And that leads me to tip number 7 is the chest dipping or extending through the back. So what you'll see people do is that when they squat, the upper back will just round. And part of the reason being is maybe just to be a hypermobile individual and their chest is just dropping, they're very unstable. So a couple solutions to that would be, if it's a male, I may just give them a 30-pound weight and have them squat down and see how the load impacts their squatting. Does it improve, or are they still dipping forward? If it's a female, give them just a little bit of lighter weight, 20-pound weight, but we're still looking for the same thing. Is there improvement with the load as opposed to without the load? What that tells me just by adding the load is that it's providing some stability to them, giving a little bit more stiffness when they squat. And then finally, we can also grab a 10-pound weight and we can hold the weight straight out. Now, just from here, it's going to engage the core and the weight here is going to provide a little bit of a counterbalance. So it'll force us to keep our chest tall as well. So this may be a solution as well if someone's chest is dipping forward, just by holding that weight straight out, engaging the core, and it's providing a counterbalance, so they'll have to stay tall in that position. So if their squat does improve, what that just tells me is they have to work on core stability, and that they just need more stability through their body, and eventually that will improve their squat. But just as a little bit of a substitute, using load, whether it's holding a 10-pound weight out or the 20 or 30-pound weight close to their chest, that just may be the solution as well. And also what we are looking for too, though, is that if they do squat, if they come up and they extend through their back. To me, that's just going to be, again, a little bit of a core control issue. So we want to cue them to turn their core on, and that could be simply just with this weight, holding it out. That may improve things, or holding a 20 or 30-pound weight as well. But it's going to come back to the same solutions, just working on core control to prevent either the rounding of the back or the extending up as they pop out of the hole of the squat. And then finally, the last tip I wanted to share with you guys, is my 8th and final tip, is breathing. So when breathing during the squat, focus on more of just a controlled tempo, controlled breathing tempo. Nothing too crazy on this, and I don't want to get too advanced as we're not lifting serious or heavy weight here. We're just teaching someone a beginner squat pattern. And so to do this, typically the breathing pattern would be breathing in kind of through the nose as I go down, and then breathing out on the way up. And they can just be short little breaths, nothing too extensive, just as you breathe in and then breathe out on the way up. Nothing too technical on that aspect. Really won't get into too much detail with regards to that unless someone is a little bit more advanced and they're squatting and is maybe, say, a power lifter or that aspect, or then there's different breathing strategies to then incorporate for that individual when squatting. So we'll leave it at that. And I hope these 8 tips provide you with some information that at least you can use to help improve your squat, make it more efficient, and to allow you to squat safely. If you have any questions about any of these mistakes, errors, or if you're someone that maybe previously performed one of these errors you noticed yourself and one of the corrections helped you out, let me know in the comments section below. I'd love to hear about that, or if you need help with anything with regards to the squat. And if you guys want more information, more content, be sure to sign up for my newsletter over on my website at remysovereign.com. You can see it just in the box right on the front page, where you'll also get my free guide, 7 core exercises you should probably be doing to prevent back pain. So if you want some free tips on exercise, nutrition, weightlifting, back pain, be sure to head over to my website and sign up for my newsletter. Okay guys, with that being said, have a wonderful, successful, and productive day. And until next time, take care.